Hello, welcome to the No Brain, No Gain podcast, the podcast that aims to empower the youth audience through one-on-one discussion with speakers at various points in their neuroscientific, psychological, and medical careers. My name is Sing-Myung Lee, and I'm a rising grade 12 student. I'm living in Toronto, Canada, and now Yasmin is going to introduce herself.
Yeah, so I'm Yasmin. I'm a rising grade 11 student in Nova Scotia. Yeah.
So today we have Morgan with us over here. So hi Morgan, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure, thanks so much for having me. My name's Morgan Biele. I'm going to be a senior at Duke University this fall, where I'm majoring in neuroscience and getting minors in chemistry and creative writing. And I'm hoping to go to medical school within the next couple of years. But I'm very passionate about this topic, so I'm so thrilled that they were able to invite me to speak with you all today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I'm pretty sure a lot of our audience members are really curious to hear your story and to hear your passion for the area. And I've actually been talking to some of my friends about like inviting you to our podcast, and they were actually really curious about learning about like your journey to university and like what your plans are afterwards and all of the amazing work that you do. So, yeah, Yasmin is going to ask you our very first question, and it's going to be like a fun conversation today.
Yeah, so I'm just going to start with like pretty basic questions. Like, what do you love the most about your area of interest, like medical humanities, neuroscience, kind of all of that? And what do you love about like the work you do outside of your studies? Oh, let's see. That's such a good question. I would say the way that I've sort of found myself in this area of interest has been a curiosity with how people feel. Um, and that's how I was led so quickly to neuroscience and wanting to understand really the scientific aspect behind that. I love the book by Antonio Damasio, The Feeling of What Happens, where he's trying the entire time just to explore what does this mean to feel. But also, I think that's why I've gravitated so much to the humanities as well, because where we don't have the answers in science, we do have such truth in what people have written and how people speak about how they feel. And I think I spent a lot of time wanting to make people feel happy and wanting to generate feelings of happiness. And I think that's evolved into just wanting to make people um, feel good and feel the way that they would like to feel. So I think that's sort of one of my favorite aspects of both the health humanities and of neuroscience is thinking about those things that are life-giving. That's a term I learned earlier this year that I think has really resonated with me, and just trying to cultivate that. And then, sorry, what was the second part of the question again? Oh, no problem. It was just about, like, what do you love about the work you do outside of your studies? Oh, okay, yes. Interestingly enough, I feel like it's quite cohesive. I feel like outside of my studies, it's just different approaches to trying to generate that same feeling. So, let's see. I really have loved learning about the art scene in Durham, actually. That's sort of an interesting example of something that's entirely different from what I'm doing in my classes. I've gotten to meet several artists and gone to see several art exhibits in Durham, North Carolina. And they have all of these muralists as well that are doing street art. And I think I'm so drawn to them because they create really this shared consciousness within the city and this really just shared story that I think is so interesting. So speaking with them has been absolutely fantastic because it does more of the same of understanding our feeling.
Amazing. So you mentioned that, like you really want to generate this feeling of like happiness in a lot of people. So I was actually wondering, like if you have like a very like your favorite concept or idea in neuroscience that or like something that you learned about neuroscience that really like you love so that you really want to like share it and spread it to a lot of people.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I think when I first started getting really interested in neuroscience, I was so so attached to empathy as a concept, and I'm so intrigued by it still to this day. I would tell people that, like, if I could create sort of my own area of study, it would be this empathy studies idea. And I loved that Brene Brown video about empathy, and all sorts of there were just all sorts of pieces that I thought were so interesting, and now I've kind of built upon that, and I'm really excited at the current moment about the notion of distributed mind, or like collective consciousness. So thinking about, like, there are all those fascinating, some of them sort of contentious, thoughts about mirror neurons and how much mirror neurons are working between people. But there really are all of these different accounts about the way that you can create sort of this collective, bigger consciousness with other people. And one of the sort of strongest examples of that, I think, is with narratives and with reading and narratology. So I think collective consciousness is probably right now like my most exciting topic that really just lights me up inside.
Perfect.
So it's like moving on to the next question. Like, I think you spoke about, like, art and humanities in the field of medicine. So, like, can you just like share more about your involvement, like what you've been doing in your studies, and even outside, like more in depth into what you've been doing?
Sure, absolutely. Let's see. So I've always thought that I was a STEM person, and there was sort of this strange binary that was instilled within me when I was younger, that you were a STEM person or you were an English person or a humanities person. And then when I was in high school, I took a course that was just an AP literature type course. And we read this one book, Atonement by Ian McEwan, and then we read Hamlet by Shakespeare. And I just remember being in total awe, because I was like, wait a minute, we're doing STEM. This is science for sure. And it just felt like a different methodology for the same pursuit. And I had been so confused because I was really flustered in the fact that it felt like there was this crossover. But then I really was so excited about the fact that you could go about the same pursuits just with different methods. And so then when I got to Duke, I took a fantastic writing course that really immersed me in learning about the neurodiversity movement and sort of the activism and advocacy going on there, and also the amazing writing by neurodivergent writers. And I've started taking creative writing courses, and I mentioned that I'm going to be minoring in that actually now, as I've loved sort of the process of trying to embody different perspectives and different consciousnesses myself and putting that on paper as just sort of an experiment and an exploration. And then this past semester, I took a great course about neurohumanities, and we really focused on the writing of Gustave Flaubert, who now, long after his death, they suspected was probably neurodivergent and also maybe had epilepsy. And you can see that really reflected in his writing, as he attributes a lot of characters as to having, he calls them sort of like nervous diseases, or he'll have really interesting descriptions for like the way that they sense and engage with the world around them, because he has such attention to sort of the nervous system and responding to stimuli himself. And I also took a course about 18th century literature and the invention of health. And that was so cool too, because we were reading, for example, this really, really long book that's in the epistolary form, so it's like letters between different people, called Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. And the whole time I was thinking about how much it mirrored a patient encounter. So I guess those are some of the ways that I'm seeing it in my studies. I just feel like there's this overlap that hasn't necessarily been recognized, but is very much potent, very much there. And I'm excited to continue doing that because I think I'm learning a lot in the sort of pre-health, pre-med track from those courses that aren't included within that. So it's been very cool.
That's actually interesting because I don't know, because I'm not in university yet, I can't really imagine how it'd be like to, like be able to take a course that really like ignites something in your mind or that really just helps you understand something that you didn't really think about in the past, and then I also think it's interesting because I've always been like thinking that in my school when I like take like an English course or something, I really like enjoy it to an extent, but I don't really understand why I enjoy it. And like now that I think about it, maybe it's because, I'm able to see some aspects of like people and like authors that I haven't really like explored as of yet that really also shines light into neurodiversity and everything. So thank you for sharing that. It's actually really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely recommend looking up cognitive narratology as a field because it is sort of like cognitive neuroscience, but specifically about understanding narratives and why we gravitate so much towards them. And the other thing I would also really recommend, I love to learn about the writers of the books that I'm reading. Because I think that sort of allows me to dig into that curiosity about the neuroscience sort of embodiment process. Some of those writers might be neurodivergent or sort of getting curious about, oh my gosh, I'm going on all these tangents. And she, at the beginning of it, explains her first paragraph. And the first paragraph is just a couple of sentences. She can explain her intention in like every single word for pages and pages and just go on and on and on. And it's so rich. I have another example too. I don't know if you want me to just keep giving examples, but we also, I've read this piece by Shulamith Firestone, and all of it is written in vignettes. So it's like, again, no more than 2 pages, but it's so deep because of all of those things that aren't really put on the page. And so when you read about all of these little sections and you read about her, you better understand those little vignettes because you have this understanding of where she's writing from. So anyway, I think that's a really cool pursuit to try.
Yeah, that's definitely really interesting. I'll definitely look into it. So then that leads to like my next question about like, because like for me personally, when I was learning about neuroscience, something that really motivated me a lot was the fact that as I learned more about like different aspects of neuroscience, I actually learned a lot about myself because I'm able to understand things about my own brain and mind and why I, do sometimes like do weird things, And so I was wondering if you also had that like moment in like maybe exploring or learning neuroscience or like even psychology or about the mind when you actually felt like it helped you grow as a person.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of neuroscience itself, the lab that I've been involved in has been really interesting for that. I'm working on designing an experiment right now that thinks a lot about causal reasoning and also counterfactual thinking. And so I think in going to those lab meetings and understanding those sort of ways of thinking, those mechanisms that we think, has been pretty cool because then I can kind of catch myself doing that. And then I also think exposure to the neurodiversity paradigm has been really fascinating and eye-opening to me. It forces you to recognize how much ableism is around us constantly, and also how much of a spectrum there is in neurodivergence. And I think, just really sort of is a way to change your perspective very quickly.
Interesting.
That kind of takes me to because you were talking about your involvement in the lab, kind of takes me to the question that I was wondering, how did you know that honestly, going into medical humanities and just researching about these different things, that was for you? Or even you talk about how you're a STEM person, how did you know that? What led you to that?
That's a great question. I consider myself to be sort of lucky in that I've had this direction for a really long time, and I think it's perhaps unusual. But there's, for lack of a better word, just sort of this warmth and light that I feel, and curiosity that I feel when I start talking about these subjects. So for me, I just know that personally it's really fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it aligns with some of my goals. When I think about my life, really, a lot of it, I hope, is sort of oriented towards wanting to help other people and instill well-being within myself and within others. And so I think that this is it's a really strong way of going about that. It feels very promising and hopeful in a way that's really needed, and I appreciate having that feeling. But then also, a mentor of mine, Dr. Giordano, who Sung-Myung has actually had the pleasure of meeting, will say that he likes to every 5 years check in with himself and try and do something new and change something up. So that even though you might have this clear thread through all of your pursuits and a very clear, straightforward career, every 5 years you can recognize that you don't need to be doing the same thing, and you can expand outwards and sort of broaden your horizon, even if it's just a small step horizontally, or it could be a huge leap. It allows you to sort of keep changing, keep learning, and I hope that I'm always continuing to learn. I feel like it's impossible not to. So I think, those are sort of my two thoughts there, that I just sort of follow those things that are making me light up, but then also knowing that there's so much room for growth.
I actually really wanted to ask you this question, and I hope it's not too specific, that to an extent that it's hard to answer, but I think I've been seeing a lot from you, and you just talked about it as well, how you really feel this warmth in your life, and when you actually engage yourself in topics related to neuroscience and everything like that, you kind of really get motivated by your passion for helping other people and stuff like that. Do you ever feel or ever felt in high school, or even right now, that your tendency to really be that kind of a person who's, I don't know, oh my god, how do I explain this? Who's really driven by emotions and empathy for other people, and being able to really just um be motivated by both the scientific and non-scientific aspect of things, because you're doing both neuroscience and also creative writing and everything. Did that ever make you less capable of really engaging in the really deepest STEMmy side of things, if that makes sense? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Also, the very literal answer is I have found myself in research positions and in courses that are sort of more abstract and have been with human participants, as that's something that I've been really curious about. Whereas I have peers who, are doing PCR and are, using actual brain specimen and working with mice, or working with fruit flies or zebrafish, or and there is sort of the benefit of both, but I definitely haven't been exposed to sort of that level of depth in kind of molecular neuroscience or in genetics or that sort of thing. So that's sort of the literal answer. Then I guess a little bit more extrapolated in my answer. I definitely feel like I've experienced some burnout, and like in the pandemic as well. That was sort of difficult to be trying to be so sensitive to people's well-being and seeing it struggle so much around me and feeling sort of helpless.
Yeah.
I think the feeling of helplessness is really, really prominent amongst people who would like to go into the medical field but don't feel like they have the capacity to make that impact that they so strongly yearn to make. So I think that's very difficult. And then I think it sort of just pushes me to want to find other ways that I can be making myself and making other people feel that sense of well-being. And maybe that's why the humanities has been quite appealing to me at this particular part in my life, is it feels like a more accessible way to generate well-being and to think about healthcare. So I've been volunteering in a hospital, but that doesn't look like making diagnoses, or that doesn't look like doing surgery or any procedures. It's very hands-off, but it's asking people questions and it's being there to listen. So that's really, that's what we can do. And it's extremely meaningful. Sometimes it can be even more meaningful. So I think that's sort of one of the ways that I've been able to work with this feeling of wanting to be improving other people's lives at this kind of current stage.
Thank you for answering that question, because
yeah, of course. I hope that's what you were. Yeah, I hope that's what you meant.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going for, because I think I also have some similar problems, and I just always want to know what other people are, dealing with situations where they're like both equally interested in STEM but also humanities, and they want to somehow make an impact both ways, but sometimes you're burned out one way and then you don't know what to do the other way. So thank you so much for sharing that.
It's also, of course, it's also, and I can speak from my personal experience, it's very scary to be exposed for the first time to just how much knowledge there is and how long it takes to actually understand all of it, and just how expansive and specialized the academic world is. So I feel like I remember getting to college, and it was extremely exciting, but it was so terrifying how little I knew and how much I was just barely scratching the surface. Meant there was a lot of potential, and I was excited to start sort of slowly but surely chipping away at some of that. But it also is sort of scary because you realize that you know so little about something that has so much to work with. So that's kind of another component of it. But I think you just sort of keep learning, and that's the only way to make it a little bit more manageable.
So I can just follow up with another question. So I know you said how, again, going back to you said you were a STEM person, so meaning that you started your interest in STEM at kind of a younger age. So I kind of have two-ish questions with this one. So how do you think that helped you discover what you wanted to pursue? And then why do you think it's crucial to engage people from a younger age to pursue their STEM interests?
Okay, yeah. Let's see. I think at the most basic level, when young kids are learning about science, a lot of times there's this equating of if you're a question asker, you're posing all of these why questions and you're seeking the answers. That's sort of at its most simple, the scientific method. And I feel like people are sort of transitioned from being a why question person into a science person. but that's maybe a little bit too simplified down. I just really was pretty interested in doing sort of the going to museums, and then it was paying attention in those classes and trying to understand why things work the way they do. And then when I got to middle and high school, I found that I just really loved my science courses and biology. And then in high school, there was this program called the Dartmouth Brain Bee.
Mm-hmm.
I live about a half hour from Dartmouth College, and they had a lot of their PhDs and postdocs put on this day for people in the community to learn about neuroscience. And the whole process was one of scientific communication for them and working on being able to present their knowledge in a way that was structured for anyone basically between the ages of 10 and 30, but it was mostly sort of geared towards that teenage years age group. And they would bring out specimens, and you could hold the brain, and they would bring out an EEG, and they would bring out some of this backyard brains technology that I would recommend. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was completely in awe. So I was lucky enough that I had those resources in order to be able to figure out such interest in the brain. And it was also a teacher of mine who I still speak to frequently, who had been the one to recommend me going over there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would say just trying to integrate some of those resources earlier on, and yeah, making those ideas available is the best way to get young people involved. And they made it so fun, and they made it so available and interesting, and I was really grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, like, I think, and it really depends on personal experiences, but a lot of people have, like, this thing where they, like, were exposed to some kind of, like, a local event or, like, an opportunity that happened where they were, like, simply just exposed to it, but they were actually, like, it left, like, a really long-lasting impact on them. And yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I think that's really amazing. Thanks so much, Morgan, for sharing all of that.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of those grassroots organizations. They have constantly been having a huge impact on me. So, yes, definitely local stuff for sure.
Yeah, local things. Sometimes, like, we feel like local things, we don't really pay attention to them at some point, but then they actually, like, end up leaving the most impact on people, which is why I always think, like, grassroots organizations and even, like, small organizations that work in, like, smaller community level and even, like, smaller villages, they really do play a significant impact. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So thank you so much, Morgan, for sharing your answers and experiences to all of those questions. We would now like to move on to some of the pre-submitted questions by young people in our communities, and they were actually wondering about, your life in general, maybe like some things that are kind of unrelated to neuroscience, but they still want to know. So Yasmin, you can go ahead.
So one of the questions we had asked was just like, what?
So there were a lot of different reasons why I truly fell in love with Duke. And I think if you ask me now, my answers would be quite different than when I was applying, but equally strong. So I was very excited about the fact that it was a pretty small undergraduate size, but also at this huge research university and sort of had this global scale to it, despite how their undergraduate neuroscience program, for sure. The prospect of going to college for my bachelor's degree, it felt like also a process of finding a lot of independence for the first time. So I wanted to be in a new space and develop sort of a sense of place for myself. And I had never been to North Carolina, and we didn't really have any family ties to North Carolina. And it's a really beautiful area. And Durham is a fantastic city. There's such rich history there and such a vibrant community. they spoke about collaboration over competition as their current main goal and mission, and that really had struck a chord with me. I was so excited about that, because I did want to find a learning environment where it was academically rigorous, but not because it was competitive, but because it was a very mutual process of all wanting to learn together. And I have really found that in some of my classes. It's been very cool. In physics, for example, we all really came together to work together to all succeed because the course was quite difficult. So organic chemistry is the same way. So I think those were sort of my why Dukes. And now that I'm actually there, I'm blown away by the professors. We have opportunities to grab lunch with them sometimes and always go to their office hours. And I've had a professor invite our class over to her house for dinner.
That's so nice.
And just, cultivating these really wonderful relationships. If to the people listening are podcast fans, I would recommend looking up Everything Happens with Kate Bowler. She works in the Duke Divinity School. Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. I'll leave you guys to explore it. I don't want to go on too long a tangent. But yes, she's also such a staple of Duke for me. Those are a couple things.
That's actually really amazing. That just reminded me, this is kind of unrelated, but like in my school, like my principal actually invites students to her house for like a brunch party or something, like the graduating year students. And I think that's like the moment where a lot of the students like realize they love the school somehow, like right before they graduate.
That's very sweet.
So I don't know. I think
very
that's
sweet. Yeah,
it's really amazing.
it's really hard. Yeah, these schools are really, really hard. Super, and they test you for sure. So it's important sometimes to find those moments where
Exactly.
you realize that you are liking it, you are enjoying it, and not get bogged down by the fact that it's very difficult. But there's joy in that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's another question. If you are willing to share, were there any moments where you were feeling, anxious or stressed in college, and how did you deal with those moments?
I feel anxious and stressed in college every single day. No, absolutely. I've learned a lot about myself, and I think that's a good thing. No, it's very necessary. I think I will probably be anxious and stressed every day of medical school. I will probably be anxious and stressed in residency, practicing, whatever ends up happening to me. I think I certainly learned a degree of perfectionism that I think has been really helpful and hurtful. And now I'm working on trying to unlearn some of that and just focus on doing my best. I think I also had ingrained in me sort of taking a lot of worth from my grades and recognizing that intrinsic sources of worth are going to be more meaningful than focusing purely on these external grades or whatever they are, whatever it may be for you. And it's hard, but it's important. And then just in terms of little things, another why Duke is they have fantastic green spaces. And I have learned over the course of quarantine and coming back to Duke that I really benefit from getting outside and going on walks and observing my surroundings. And it makes me realize that a lot of the times I'm anxious and stressed about things that are very important to me, but that I always have generally more time than I expect, and that it'll all be okay, those sort of things. I can sort of look at the way that the light is hitting a tree, for example, and be like, you know what, it's going to be fine. So, But yes, if anyone is listening and feeling worried about being anxious and stressed, feeling anxious and stressed about being anxious and stressed, you're certainly not alone in that. So, but I wish you good luck in figuring out what works for you and going with it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So, just moving on to another question asked. Is there a community you want to serve by studying neuroscience and medicine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Many of them. I would say, I've mentioned that the neurodivergent community has been frequently overlooked in academia. So I hope that I'll get to continue learning from, working alongside, and representing neurodivergent authors and researchers and doctors. Then also there's just a lot of stigma surrounding sort of disorder or mental illness in all communities, and working sort of against that stigma to sort of bring access to everybody. But then also I'm a huge fan of the social determinants of health framework, and understanding that health is a very social thing, and that a lot of health disparities originate in social sources. So I think I'd like to pay a lot of attention to, like socioeconomic status and bringing healthcare to people in lower socioeconomic statuses. Certainly, health insurance can be a huge barrier to access to care. Obviously, there are huge racial disparities. There are huge gender disparities. All of these being noted, granted, I say this as a white person, so I think representation is huge, and would constantly need to continue to recognize what my role can be. But I think paying attention to this and trying to expand access is something that I really hope I'll be able to do.
That's really amazing.
Okay. Hope that's a complete sentence. But yeah, those are some things that I'm paying attention to, and would like to, I think, in being able to note which communities have been marginalized historically and continue to be, and then try and figure out types of care that meet them where they are, and is the type of care that they're looking for, not just me projecting some type of care that I suspect they're looking for, is the best way to go about it, and just, always granting people their autonomy. Yeah.
Morgan, you're amazing.
Thank you.
I just think, in a few years I'll probably see you on news being standing on the side of, neurodiverse people and marginalized communities, and I don't know, it's gonna be amazing, and our listeners will also be lucky enough that they heard you say this, and then they see you in the news a few years after. So that leads to our last question that was submitted, pre-submitted. So do you have any tips for individuals who are struggling to find their passions?
Let's see. I would say, I guess it's going to be different for everybody, but one of the things that I like doing the best is people who I'd like to, sort of emulate, and figuring out what sort of pieces and characteristics of them you're gravitating towards, and trying them out. Try it on, see how it fits, and see if you get any of those feelings of warmth, of light, of life-givingness. I wanted to mention anyway, so I'll sneak this in here. There's the founder of narrative medicine. Her name is Rita Sharon, and I'm an aspiring disciple of Rita Sharon. I love all of her work, and have written articles about it, and hope that one day I can study under her. And she does this one thing where first of all, she uses her hands a lot. So I find that after watching her TED Talk, it's something that I want to do too. And I try it out. I sort of make some of the movements that she makes, teach people, and I'll find myself talking and trying it out. Anyway, definitely look up Rita Sharon and narrative medicine. But if you're trying to figure out what you're interested in, look to other people who are doing things that are cool to you in any field at all. YouTube is a gift we have. Social media is a huge gift. It's silly, but Instagram is a great way to find people. And I would say just sort of test it all out and see what works, see what doesn't. And your passion can be in anything. And you can make it academic if you want it to be academic. Absolutely. I've read papers about meme culture in linguistic journals. So know that it's there. And if you don't want it to be academic, you want it to be grassroots, it's also there. Or you want it to be, I don't know, it can be anything. But just follow what feels good when you try it out.
It's interesting.
That's an okay answer.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's interesting that you mentioned social media, because I actually personally get a lot of random inspiration from social media. From people who are not really related to the field that I'm looking into, and then I just get like the most amount of motivation from them. And I know a lot of people say, stop going on social media or whatever, but like I actually can't stop, because I actually get a lot of like empowerment from a lot of the people to actually just like live a better life and to just generally pursue whatever I want to. So
for better or worse, it's extremely subjective and unfiltered. So if you want access to first-person accounts of what people are going through, social media is a great way to find it. And you just know that it's truth to that one person. So if that's what you're looking for, is that kind of truth, then you can find it. Absolutely.
Definitely. So, before we end up, we have a common question, the final question from the Shine Project that we asked to all of our guests. What does it mean to have a brain and to know your brain?
Oh my goodness. What does it mean to have a brain and to know your brain? If only I knew. I don't know that I know my brain yet, but I don't think I'll ever know my brain. But I would say, I think a lot of the reason that I've done work with trying to bring neuroscience and neuroethics to other people is that the pursuit of trying to know your brain is really fulfilling and rewarding, and opens up so many doors for yourself. In that, I think before I was talking about autonomy, and I think that's one of the best ways to do it, is to recognize how much power is in that lump of cells is a great way to recognize your own autonomy. Your brain is capable of so much, and it's such a wonder that it works the way it does. So I think the act of trying, even though it's never going to be some clear-cut success point, you probably never will know your brain. The act of trying is a really admirable and valuable one. For yourself and for the people around you, it changes the way that you conduct yourself, the way that you interact with other people, the way that you interact with the world. And it's really, I think that's enjoyable. So, that's a silly last answer, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. Yasmin, do you have any final words or questions or anything you want to say before we finish this up?
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to end up by again thanking you, because I know that even myself as like a high school student, I'm confused about what field I want to go to, and I don't know what's my passion, so I'm trying to involve myself in so many things to see what shines to me. So I think it's so powerful how you mentioned, that we need to involve ourselves and we need to make sure that we know what works for us. So yeah, thank you so much for speaking on that.
Yeah, of course. Be patient. Be nice to yourself. You'll figure it out. And you only need to figure it out for the present. You can always change it.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for coming to talk to us today. And yeah, we will see you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.